Hello and welcome to this episode of Connected Thinking in association with the NLA. I'm joined today by Ross Sayers from Landsec, but actually Ross, we're meeting under a slightly different context. We're meeting at the end of your 2-year term as chair of City Property Association. You've just completed your time and it'd be really good just to get your reflections. Any surprises, any highs, what your legacy is going to be. Just to give some of your thoughts, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Trevor. It's really nice to be here. And it's nice to be here, having handed over the role as chair
Bit more relaxed.
last week, so a little bit more relaxed. And I've come with a copy of the CPA annual report, a well-thumbed copy available on the website. Well, I mean, where do we start? The last 2 years. I must start by saying it's been incredible fun. I've really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure. I was certainly missold the role. I think I've been on the board for about 6 or 7 years, and when I was asked to chair the board, I was told, it's not a great deal of work, a couple of hours a week, should be fairly straightforward, not much more than you're doing already. And it wasn't quite as straightforward as that, but really, really enjoyable. But it was interesting because thinking about this and thinking about, you get so involved in the day job, with the day job at Landsec, but then all of the stuff that we do on a rolling basis through the CPA, and you rarely get time to kind of come up for breath, I think. And now in the last couple of weeks, as I've been thinking about what does life look like afterwards, you start to think back. And what's really interesting, over the last few years, everything has kind of blended. We've seen inflation and COVID and Ukraine, and what was yields going up, and
market's definitely changed.
And the amount
of the 2 years you've been there,
it was interesting looking back and trying to put those dates to when was COVID and when was the Ukraine conflict and when did inflation really start rising and when did we see this huge kind of uncertainty in the construction marketplace, and when you actually put all those different things on a bit of a chart, you start to figure out what impacts what and when and what was the world looking like when I first started my role. And actually you go back to COVID kind of 2020, and there was all the discussion around hybrid working, death of the office, and you were very much involved in the thinking at the city corporation at that time. Is this the death of the office? But at the same time as all that discussion was going on during COVID, you had really low cost of finance. It was almost free money at the time. But starting to see some construction market volatility, and then that was 2 years worth of that. It felt like we were starting to see some stabilisation, and actually maybe the office isn't quite dead, and people were starting to flow back. And
do you think there was a misstep there? Post-COVID, do you think there was a misstep by the market not understanding that the office would come back, that actually we would see people growing their businesses and the office resurging again?
It's really difficult, isn't it? It's really difficult to know. With the benefit of hindsight, yes, because we are where we are, and demand is huge. But it's always easy looking backwards, isn't it? With the benefit of hindsight, saying it was a misstep. So I would say yes, with the benefit of hindsight, probably. But when you're right in the middle of it, who knows? And actually, what it drove a lot of was just wait and see. So the lease events that were coming, we just have to wait. Organisations weren't taking big decisions to lease office space and change their requirements.
But almost to the other extent now, the market we find ourselves in, where there's a pipeline constraint on new offices coming through. Housing shortages all over the place. When big commercial leases are coming up, those companies want more space.
Yes.
They're growing their businesses, right? And we're almost in the flip of what we saw 5 to 10 years ago, right?
It's incredibly positive now from an occupier standpoint. But you throw into that the construction uncertainty and the cost of delivery now. So as you kind of came out of that the COVID process with construction uncertainty starting to grow but low cost of finance, and then the Ukraine war kicked off early 22, and then we just saw, and we saw two things really. We saw this hyperinflation from the construction world, and at the same time we saw 18 months of base rate rises, which drove up yields, which impacted property values. So that kind of the next 18 months from the Ukraine conflict kicking off just really heightened that viability challenge and uncertainty in the construction market. So I think when I then, because it felt like, I think a lot of that stuff was happening while I was chair, but actually when you look back at the timeline and try and figure out what's been going on over the last 5 years, actually when I landed early 24 as chair of the board at the CPA, yields were already probably high, base rates had kind of hit their peak, construction costs had seen a long period of kind of hyperinflation. So there was this acute viability challenge, but at the same time, when I took over as chair, there was some good news in that the occupier market was really strong.
Yeah.
We were seeing, particularly in the city, huge demand for great office space, and as that huge demand was coming through and the pipeline was limited, we were seeing this incredible rental growth, which has been really positive. So with all the viability challenges, there has been some really good news, which is the rental growth and the occupier demand. But I think the focus for the 2 years for me then became pretty clear. It was trying to turn this fantastic pipeline. You've been chair of the planning committee for a couple of years and very involved in that process for a number of years. And the city are very, very successful at running a development pipeline and running a planning pipeline and getting schemes successfully through. And it was clear that a key focus of my tenure as chair was to take that pipeline and make it, turn it into construction starts. Because we as a board and as the chair and as an association, we are here to work on behalf of all of our members. And a number of
you're very much the voice of that sort of development industry, property industry in the city. Has that changed? Has that voice changed? Do you feel the CPA, what it needs to do next to kind of remain at that forefront of being that voice and making sure that the market is heard?
Yeah, I think I haven't been involved in the CPA for 25 years, so I can't really speak for what's always been the case. But it has felt like the last 3 or 4 years we've got much more granular on and focused on what we need to do, and it's not been kind of really high level involvement in the industry. It's just making sure our voice is heard. It's where can we add most value. And rather than be an association that has 50 priorities over the year and a light touch on all of them, we're saying where can we have the most value, and what can we do that's going to have the biggest impact for our members and for the industry. And I think that has been focused. For my term certainly there were two things. There were supporting the city plan, the 2040 city plan through, and there was a lot of work that went into speaking at the examination in public and looking at all the evidence bases and trying to make sure that we support the city in embedding this framework for growth. So that was a big part of our support for the industry and also for the city corporation to have this really fantastic framework for growth moving forward, and that gives us a lot of stability, I think, as an industry. And then the second one, let's get the city building again. Let's focus on all of the work that we've done on viability and lots of discussions around sill phasing, lots of evidence-based thought leadership on the amount of cycle spaces required. So it's been a journey. But I think we talked about highlights and some reflections of the 2 years. There's probably in kind of two buckets. I guess there's professional and then there's the personal highlights. I think from a professional standpoint, I think certainly working really hard to get the 2040 city plan through and speaking at the examination in public. I think the relationship between the CPA and the industry and the city corporation has probably never been stronger. Which has been really.
It definitely
really
felt
good.
like a unifying moment, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. I think we work really well together to everybody's benefit. And as we always say, a thriving city means a thriving London, which means a thriving UK. So I think us working together as the city corporation and the property industry is really strong. I think that over the last 2 years has been a highlight for me, both personally and professionally. And then all the work we did, the detailed, granular, evidence-based work on viability. How do we? And now we're continuing to go through that work with the planning obligations, SPD, and what's the right answer to Section 106, and trying to support a faster planning process. But all the the cycle parking, whilst it sounds like quite a dry subject, and it actually got a lot of press.
Yeah.
It got some really amazing press coverage. It got the ear of the GLA, and it's something important, because if you're going to dig a 4-story basement to fill up with cycle spaces and showers and everything, and then 80% of them are sat empty, it's just crazy. Because
there's a lot of embodied carbon down there.
There's embodied carbon. It's digging, creating space below ground is carbon intensive, it's really risky, it takes a lot of time, and it costs a lot of money, and all of these things impact development viability. So whilst it was a fairly dry subject, and we went really detailed into the evidence base and the numbers, I think coming out of that was a really clear conclusion, and I think it's got some really great coverage.
What will be really interesting is, with those basements that are already built, how can they be repurposed? I think it'd be really interesting for the CPA to be really involved in that discussion going forward. To say, actually, you've got these basements now, you've got that space in the heart of central London. How can they be rethought about? How can they be repurposed?
Yeah, that's certainly it, and certainly for the buildings that have been built and have them sat there. That's a big piece of work that they'll be doing. I think the biggest opportunity is to stop them being built in the first place. Because at the end of the day, if you've got a basement that's 3 stories down and you don't need to fill it full of cycle spaces anymore, then there's limited opportunity. I mean, there is opportunity, but it will be gyms or other space. But I think the biggest opportunity for us, and for, I think, related to this piece of research, is not building them in the first place. So it's been, from that perspective, I think professionally there was a lot of ground covered over the last 2 years, and then personally, I mean, it's been I think I spoke at the board and at the AGM last week, giving some reflections to the board, and a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome and landing in a role that you think, oh my goodness, this is how I ended up here. And I had a bit of that when I first joined the board 6 years ago, and working for a big organisation like Landsec, and working on, I think at the time I was working on a scheme, 21 Moorfields, hugely complex scheme, but you're quite project focused, and then all of a sudden you find yourself on the board of the biggest investors and developers in the city, and you kind of you do feel a bit of kind of imposter syndrome being in this room, and you start being fairly quiet and listening, and then over time you start to feel like you do have a bit of a voice, and just as you're finding yourself feeling a bit more comfortable in that room, then you're asked to chair the board, which was kind of, I guess, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, but probably mostly terrifying. But actually, I must say that the last 2 years have been such incredible fun, and the board have been really supportive, huge shout out. I mean, we're very fortunate as a chair to have such a kind of strong chair of the planning committee and a very clear kind of vision politically, and then when you chose Tom Slay as your successor, and I've been very lucky with the politicians that I've had around me in my time. But I must say that the first time you stand up at the Guildhall, 2 weeks into your term, you voted in at the AGM at the end of April. A couple of weeks later, it's the CPA lunch in the Guildhall, and we had Amal Rajan speaking, and everybody's enjoying the champagne reception, doing a bit of network and having some fun and looking forward to sitting down, and you're in the back, in one of the rooms out the back with Amal Rajan, and Amal Rajan, a kind of legend of the BBC, looks through the door and says, "Oh my God, this is terrifying, isn't it?" It's like, well, you're the BBC, look at me. But I think that first CPA actually standing up and giving a 15-minute speech in the most incredible surroundings, and having probably not slept for a few days beforehand, thinking about it, but having done it and it went really well, and Amal Rajan spoke beautifully. The lunch was a great success, and as everybody else kind of filtered out, and you're in the back room sorting some stuff out, getting your bag, and you kind of walk out all by yourself with your rucksack on, and then walked over the road to Mason's Avenue and to meet a couple of people, and the whole place was absolutely rammed full.
Yeah.
And you walk down that alley, and the kind of pathways. It's probably
It's
just
the Red Sea party.
It's probably my
yeah.
romantic vision of what nobody else remembers it like this. But you walk down that little Mason's Alley. I was coming to meet you actually, and the people part. Oh, here he is, Ross, and like pats on the back, and that as my kind of personal highlight. That's something. It's just a 50-yard walk that I'll probably never forget.
Yeah. It's funny that imposter syndrome piece. I felt that when I became planning chair. Don't really know the industry, don't come from the industry, not born and bred through it. But actually, one thing I have found is actually the developers, the investors, that whole supply chain is actually very, very welcoming. And I'll say the CPA, part of its role, I think, has been to help guide the lay politicians like me into that space and say, actually, this is the story, this is the narrative, this is the way the industry thinks about things. Being able to talk to them as a sort of neutral party that doesn't come with their own agenda necessarily, their own self-interest, actually really helps, because it means I've got, you have a sort of navigation point. And I think you did that very well in your term. Just adding that sort of navigation on how people need to think about the built environment. We've seen, as you highlighted, huge changes in the macroeconomics in the market, but having those people there that go, you know what, we're a stabilising influence, and we're able to just guide people through this is really, really important. And actually, I want to come on to something that I think has emerged through your term and is becoming more and more critical and needs to get more and more attention, is this piece around how we treat office. And Charles has been very vocal. The CPA has done a paper recently on how they feel that office in central London needs to be treated as critical infrastructure. Right? And to my mind, the city's always been protective of its office stock. Where do you think that conversation is going to go? Do you think we're going to get that embedded into policy at a high level?
It's going to be a tough journey, I would imagine. I think so much of UK PLC growth is driven by the service industry, and that only works when you've got a fully functioning office market that can deliver space for people to collaborate, for people to work together. And it's such a hugely important part of what delivers growth and GDP for the country. And if we can't do it in London, and if we can't deliver the space that people need, then people will go elsewhere. And I don't think it's people, big organisations saying, well, we can't deliver the space in central London, so we'll happily move to a business park on the M25 or a different city. I think we are, as a country, competing with other global cities. So we're competing with New York and Hong Kong and Frankfurt and all these other kind of Paris, these big cities, and they would quite happily see London fail to deliver on the promise of all this of office space and growth, and they would quite happily take all those tenants and occupiers in global headquarter buildings into one of their other locations. You know, we've got such an incredible starting point when you look at the UK, particularly even more so I think now in times of uncertainty, and everybody always talks about, you know, the time zone is a huge strength, the language, the legal system, such, you know, strong, sound legal system, and political stability. We always have to now say relative relative political stability. But those kind of things, but relative political stability is so important when times are so uncertain, and politics, geopolitics is so incredibly unstable. So we've got this, you know, fantastic bedrock, and London even more so, and we just need to make sure we deliver on it and we use it now. And if we stop delivering offices because people don't think they are that important, then I think in a few years' time we'd be really, really disappointed in what impact that has. So I think now's the time. So it's been emerging over the course of my term. I think it's certainly something Nikki's now taken over from me as chair. It's something high on her priority list. We're trying to establish an all-party parliamentary group on the service sector and offices. So that's going to be something that we are pushing really hard, and if we can get offices recognised as critical economic infrastructure, I think that will increase that stability, and I think it will support investment into the industry, because people will, you know, I think we are as an industry solid, and for all of the reasons we've just laid out, the legal system and political stability. I think having it the concept of it as critical economic infrastructure just gives that another layer of stability and consistency and predictability, which the investment market really needs.
They do. Let's just move to the future a little bit, and I think one of the things that's come through your term when you were chair is the emergence of AI. And for me, and the sort of language in the city has been, we want to embrace AI, right? We don't want to be fearful of it.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity right now, in my opinion, to actually become a global headquarters, an access point for AI leadership and the AI sector. So we are a producer, not just a consumer of AI. And you know, everyone's fearful of jobs and where the next generation of graduates is going to be if AI takes over those roles. But in my opinion, the opportunity is also there.
Yeah.
What's really important for us to address, I think, and it'd be interesting to get your reflections from your time in that space as chair, is how the built environment adapts to that emerging sector that didn't exist a decade ago.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I was talking to someone the other day actually about a journalist from Green Street News and saying, you know, if you're delivering an office now, do you have to design that office for any scenario in the future with the rise of AI and hybrid working, and you know, do you need to make sure that the office is so flexible that it can adapt to anything and even change of use, you know? And I said, well, I don't think, you know, we don't have to be building offices today that in 30 years' time can be turned into a hotel or a residential. You know, I think the impact of AI will, I mean, who knows what the overall impact will be, but I get a sense that the best will thrive in terms of the office space, and the rest will have to adapt. So if you're delivering space in the middle of the city and in central London, I don't see a risk that, you know, we'll deliver a fantastic office space in the middle of the city of London. In 20 years' time, we think, well, AI has had an impact on, you know, overall macro level jobs are down, so we need to now turn this office space into residential. What will happen is, if that does happen and jobs are down, it will happen in the periphery. And what we see, you know, we are we've always been, as Landsec, a huge supporter of central London office space, but also a huge supporter on retail and shopping centres. We own Gunwharf Quays down in Portsmouth, and we own Blue Water, we've got Trinity Leeds, and a number of other prime. We recently purchased Liverpool One. And whilst it's not AI driven, we have seen over the course of with online shopping and the growth of Amazon and people buying their clothes online, there was this critical point over the last 10 years really of what is the future of shopping centres, and where we got to and where we are now is we've got a really prime set of shopping centres, and what we are seeing is that undoubtedly, but I don't have all of the stats that a lot of people in my business at Landsec will have, all the really detailed stats on spend and everything else. But
well, look at one chain, right, just down the road from here. One chain, which has been through a cycle of change, regeneration. New occupants coming in, and on the weekends it is busy. We see that footfall coming back. And actually people want to be in those spaces, which I found, I a bit like you, was quite sceptical. Right, everyone's buying everything on Amazon. Is the resale going to survive? Actually it is, but it's surviving with a very different demographic, isn't it?
It is, but what we're seeing is that a number of the big retailers and clothing retailers, they might have a significantly reduced number of stores, because they haven't got a store now on every high street in the country. So they have a significantly reduced number of stores, but what they do is focus on the best stores, and what we're seeing is they're focusing on our centres like Trinity Leeds, which is a fantastic centre in the middle of Leeds, and they're taking bigger space and they're paying more rent for prime pitch retail, and that's when you go back to AI and offices, what is tending to happen is people are focusing on the core, re-entrenching to core. The periphery is more at risk than the middle, and I think the impact of AI will likely be increase in productivity, which will lead to higher value jobs, which will lead to higher salaries, and as salaries increase, what happens is the cost of the rent for a building becomes a lower and lower portion of the operating cost of the business. And we've seen that for the last 20 years probably, where rents haven't grown anything like the same as salary increases. So rent even today is the lowest portion of overall operating cost than it's ever been. And as you get higher value jobs, increased productivity, higher salaries, rent becomes such a small part of the operating cost of a business, which means you can afford to pay higher rent if you get the right space. So I just think there will be this continued bifurcation of the marketplace where the best will absolutely thrive, core locations will absolutely thrive, and central London is a core location. So I'm not so concerned about delivering office space today that has the ability to be anything in the future, a complete mix of uses. I do think it's important though that they are flexible enough to be adaptable to a different way of working. And I think that's going to be important, that we're delivering space that's got enough fresh air, it's got the right, it's got a structural grid that works, and the whole piece is flexible for whatever ways of working adapt, and more, we're seeing more collaboration space, more auditoriums, more of this kind of more open areas, club rooms. So they need to be flexible to adapt to ways of working. We don't have to worry, I don't think, in the core locations about changing use to hotels or bits like that.
Well, I think CPA has been pivotal through my time working in this sector, as a sort of thought leader, as a sort of gravitational point where people go, right, what do we think about X? And it'd be interesting to see how the CPA takes forward that argument and those points around, what the resale space needs to look, what the ecosystem needs to look like.
Yeah.
to make sure business
Yeah.
succeeds, right? But look, Ross, thank you so much for coming in.
I'm very happy to
I've
be here.
really enjoyed working with you over the last couple of years, and long may it continue. And obviously, you're back in your day job now.
Yeah,
So
fantastic.
the stresses of the real world hit home.
Yeah, people in the office can't remember my name. It'd be nice to get back to it. But and also, thank you for all your support over my 2-year
Of course.
term. It's been wonderful.
Great. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Alan.
Cheers.